The Doolittle Raid. The Doolittle Raid, also known as the Tokyo Raid, was a successful secret air operation conducted by the United States government and Army Air Forces to make Japan pay for the treacherous attack on Pearl Harbor. The raid successfully bolstered American morale and proved that Japan was not invincible. In early 1942, Lieutenant Colonel James H. Doolittle volunteered to lead a task force of 16 B25B Mitchell medium bombers to attack the most important cities of Japan. The operation was extremely ambitious, basically a one-way mission, as the bombers did not have enough range to make it back to friendly lines. Instead, Doolittle and his volunteers would have to crash land in occupied China and pray that no Japanese sighted them before being rescued. One of the first problems they encountered was that the Navy carrier that would be used, USS Hornet, only had 150 meters of runway, and a B-25 required at least 360. To make matters worse, the mission began earlier than expected, and on April 18, 1942, the carrier made contact with Imperial Navy vessels while approaching Japan. The secret mission was now compromised, but Doolittle refused to turn back. As machine gun fire and artillery shells covered the skies, the B-25 bombers took off with as little armament as possible to gain altitude faster. Leading the formation, Doolittle's B-25 marked the industrial targets to be hit with incendiary bombs. Approaching fast from over 2,000 feet, the bombers dropped their payload and set a straight course for China. However, one crew landed in the Soviet Union, and 8 crew members were captured, with 3 never coming back. The perilous mission became an astonishing propaganda victory for the United States, despite the minimal damage it caused. President Franklin D. Roosevelt even awarded Doolittle the Medal of Honor and the command of the 8th Air Force. As for the Japanese, the Tokyo Raid humiliated the Imperial Army and quickly dissipated the aura of an impenetrable and undefeated force. The raid also became a prelude to what was to come once the Allied forces approached the Sea of Japan. "15,000 airmen raid Berlin." As World War II was coming to an end, legendary Lieutenant James H. Doolittle and his 8th Air Force were tasked with bombing Berlin in a unique and unforgettable way. The hero of the Tokyo Raid was ordered to assemble the most extensive aircraft fleet of all time to force the Third Reich to surrender for good. Over 2,000 aircraft and 15,000 pilots took off to the skies on February 3, 1945, to participate in history's largest raid, and at one point, there were over 3,000 aircraft engaged in the thick of the fighting. Lieutenant Doolittle was skeptical about the mission at first. He was initially ordered to target the Friedrichstrasse railway station in Berlin, but to him, that seemed like bombing a city and going against American doctrine. Doolittle claimed it was the British who performed such bombings during their nighttime raids, but not the Americans, as they were used to bomb strategic objectives in the middle of cities with precision. Still, Doolittle followed the orders and picked the best 15,000 pilots from his 600,000-man 8th Air Force. The attack was made up of 42 bombardment groups divided into 3 air divisions. Of the 1,437 assembled aircraft, 1,003 were B-17 bombers of the upgraded G version, while the remaining 434 were B-24 Liberators. In addition, Doolittle called over 950 American fighters to defend the bombers from the Luftwaffe. Most of them were North American P-51 Mustangs. Meanwhile, the Luftwaffe could put no more than 1,600 aircraft in the skies to defend the already pummeled city of Berlin and its population, but the Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf FW-190s had enough firepower to put up stiff resistance. And then there were the anti-aircraft guns that stretched for over 40 miles. They included flak batteries, searchlights, decoy fires, target indicators, and more. After initial reconnaissance missions by Americans piloting British Mosquitoes, the colossal formation of B-17 bombers and P-51 Mustangs left England in waves. The bomber formation was 360 miles long. By the time the first B-17 wave made contact with the Luftwaffe over the skies of Berlin, the last bombers were still passing over the skies of Holland. For over 90 minutes, wave after wave of bombers dropped their payload over Berlin. The city burned for 5 days, while more than 25,000 Germans perished and more than 120,000 were left homeless. Only 18 Americans lost their lives, and 300 were declared missing in action. Taranto, the first Pearl Harbor. The Battle of Taranto, also known as the First Pearl Harbor, was a confrontation between England and Italy that occurred at the port of Taranto, Apulia, during the night of November 11, 1940. Employing a small fleet of outdated ferry swordfish biplane torpedo bombers, the Royal Navy took the Regia Marina by surprise and managed to neutralize the Italian Navy for the rest of the war. The raid became famous for being the first all-aircraft ship-to-ship naval attack in history. After the success of Operation Catapult, which ended with the destruction of the French fleet stationed in North Africa to prevent it from falling into German hands, the Royal Navy turned its eyes to its other Mediterranean adversary, Italy's Regia Marina. Admiral Andrew Cunningham was concerned that Italy's presence in the region could disrupt Britain's supply line in Africa and the Middle East, and decided to coordinate a decisive Royal Navy attack to neutralize the possible threat. Operation Judgment was then launched, but the Italians knew something was up. Admiral Inigo Campioni was aware that the Regia Marina was no match for the Royal Navy, and decided to keep his forces at the port and force Britain to take the fight to them. And that's precisely what Admiral Lumley Leicester did with a task force of light cruisers that escorted the aircraft carrier HMS Illustrious and 24 outdated swordfish torpedoes. After several reconnaissance flights, Admiral Leicester concluded that Taranto was unaware of their presence and that an attack was coming their way. Intelligence also indicated that the Italian fleet consisted of 6 battleships, 7 heavy cruisers, 2 light cruisers, and 8 destroyers. Before midnight of November 11th, the 24 swordfishes finally took off in 2 waves. Led by Lieutenant Commander Kenneth Williamson, the first squad arrived at Taranto at around 11 p.m. and unleashed hell from the skies after dropping a dozen flares to spot the enemy ships. The Italians were caught entirely off guard. During the first minutes, several ships received direct torpedo hits, putting them out of commission. When the second wave of swordfishes arrived, things got even messier, but the British managed to drop all their ordnance before making it back to their carrier. Half of the Italian force was put out of commission in just one night, at the cost of 1 crew member and 2 aircraft. The Regia Marina would be of little use to the Axis for the remainder of the war, and the Japanese would even study the British tactics employed at Taranto to prepare their own secret strike against the Americans at Pearl Harbor. The sinking of the Prince of Wales and the Repulse. Although less known than the Pearl Harbor attack, the sinking of the British battleships Repulse and Prince of Wales was another massive blow that the Allies received at the hands of the Japanese during December of 1941. The British Force Z set sail from Malaya to stop a Japanese fleet that threatened to invade its Pacific colonies. To avoid detection, the fleet ventured into the seas without proper air support. Still, the fleet was detected by several Japanese warships and carriers. The British sailors, confident in their anti-aircraft defenses and guns, went straight for the enemy formation. Noting their lack of air support, the Japanese reacted quickly and sent dozens of G-3M bombers to the skies. Although the Japanese air doctrine had never tested bombing attacks on moving ships in open water, they launched over 85 bombers to make sure they could do some damage. After several bomber waves dropped armor-piercing bombs without any results, the Japanese decided to drop torpedoes. Flying at extremely low altitude, the bombers dropped their payload while they were battered by anti-aircraft fire. Still, the Japanese scored 8 torpedo hits and sank the 2 British warships. The Japanese lost 18 aviators versus 840 British sailors who lost their lives. It was the first time that the Imperial Navy performed an air attack like this, and would continue to do so later in the war against the Americans. Operation Tidal Wave. At the outbreak of World War II, Adolf Hitler knew that Germany's resources would not be enough to cover the Wehrmacht war machine. His military then seized and protected as many production centers and valuable resources as it could find as the war progressed, However, the Allies followed their moves closely and struck back. One of the locations seized by the Germans was Ploiesti's rich oil fields in Romania, which accounted for up to 30% of the country's oil production. The Allies were aware and decided to act accordingly to cripple the Reich's war effort. The United States 9th Air Force then began to plan one of the most daring air missions to destroy the oil fields. Ploiesti was one of the most heavily defended zones of Europe, so it was not going to be easy. 178 B-24 Liberator bombers, split into 5 strike waves, were tasked to eliminate the German-controlled oil fields, and the strike force took off from Benghazi, Libya, on August 1, 1943. Several problems surfaced on the way and prevented the 5 teams from attacking at the same time. To make matters worse, the Germans were alerted of the attack and sent 200 Luftwaffe aircraft for support. Still, the American pilots decided to carry on with the attack. Through smoke, puffs of anti-aircraft guns, and fire from shot-down aircraft, the brave B-24 pilots began to drop their payloads anywhere they could. Although the raid ultimately failed, and the Germans were quick to repair the damage to the oil fields, Operation Tidal Wave earned its place as one of the most astonishing air missions of the entire war. Thank you for watching our video. Please like and subscribe to our Dark Documentaries channels to find more exciting historical content. And let us know in the comments below what you think of these air operations that made history during some of humanity's most significant conflicts.